What's up, everybody? I'm Jason, and today we're going to be talking about, or we're actually going to start talking about the EOS R5. So, this isn't going to be the sexy 20-minute, look how amazing this camera review is that, most people on YouTube have put out when talking about the EOS R5, when doing a camera review. It's not a 4-page article at DP Review that barely touches the surface of what the camera does or how it performs. This is going to be several videos. I'm going to be talking for a significant amount of time in a lot of detail and a lot of depth about a lot of the systems and functions and capabilities of the camera, what it's like to transition from a DSLR to a mirrorless camera, uh, you know, um, pretty much like everything that I've really run into where there's problems, where there's sticking points. And by and large, I want to prefix all of this by saying that I am very happy with the camera. I really like the camera. However, I'm probably going to sound like it's very hard, I'm very harsh on the camera. I have a lot of points that I find to be worth talking about, and not a lot of them, or all of them, or many of them are like, super positive, kind of over the top. Yeah, look at this, or this is amazing. There is a lot of that, and the camera on a whole is extremely good uh, in pretty much every use case I've put it to or looked at it from. But there are also a pretty good number of points that are worth considering or talking about that I don't think I personally have not seen brought up in basically any review from any source talking about the camera, sort of regardless of how long it is. So today I want to start about, or in this video I want to start by talking about the RF mount itself. I'm not even going to talk about the camera, really. I want to talk about the lens mount and some of the things that I've run into with that. So the RF mount, obviously, it's Canon's full frame capable mirrorless mount. Canon, in releasing it or announcing it, made a huge deal about three major points. So width, depth, and the number of pins that the high-speed new interface has or provides for the camera. So to throw the specs out there, it's a 54 millimeter diameter throat on the mount. There's a 20 millimeter flange to focal distance or register. This is interesting in a sense. It's a millimeter. It's the same diameter actually as the EF mount. It's the deepest of the small format camera mounts, full frame mounts. So Sony's is 18 millimeters, Nikon's is 16 millimeters. Canon went for 20. Now, kind of tangential to talking about the EOS R5, I think the reason that Canon went for 20 as opposed to going smaller has to do with the cinema line. And we see this in the C70 RF mount cinema camera. So I felt Nikon took things the wrong way. The going 16 to 16 millimeters made it an extremely shallow mount, which you could argue in some respects is good from a lens design perspective, as it could potentially enable wider lenses, or faster lenses, or a number of possibilities in the lens mount space. However, to get there, one of the things Nikon bragged about, even with the Z6 and 7, was how they had to make their shutter mechanism even thinner. It's the thinnest shutter mechanism they've ever made. It might even be the thinnest shutter mechanism in the industry. And I don't think that's a good thing to brag about. There are times when thinner is better, but there's times when you get in your way, you make something harder for not so much of a gain somewhere else. Sony, the E mount. Now, I know there's people out there that say that no, it was really designed for full frame sensors, but if you stop and you look at Sony's E mount, I don't think that was the case. I think, in fact, the dimensions of the E mount are almost identical to the dimensions of Canon's EFM mount in terms of diameter and depth. And if you look at that setup, the sensor is barely squeezed in the mount. In fact, uh, edges of the sensor are slightly occluded by the mount and require the lens to allow light or focus light out inside the thing so that they're not mechanically vignetted. Uh, but that extra 2 millimeters gives Sony a little bit more breathing room compared to Nikon. So if you look at a lot of, I think, Sony's cinema cameras now that they've got with E-mount mounts on them, they can actually put a neutral density system in that camera, in those cameras. And they have a very interesting neutral density option for those cinema cameras in that they use a LCD panel that they can vary the density on, and it becomes essentially a variable neutral density, an electrically controlled variable neutral density filter. However, I would also make the argument that this isn't the greatest option for filmmaking or cinematography either. So, one of the problems with an LCD panel is that they rely on polarization to work. And I'm not aware of any exceptions to that rule out there for LCDs. The panel darkens because there's a polarizer and between the panel and the light source. So in the case of Sony's cameras, that panel or that light source is the world, and the liquid crystals as they're polar or as they're energized electrically twist, and that twist adjusts their polarization, and that's how the LCD panel gets darker. And so, in effect, what you have with those Sony cameras is it's a novel, extremely tunable, in a sense, solution to the ND problem, but you also have a polarizer in your camera sort of all the time that you can't rotate, as far as I know. You can't completely get rid of, as far as I know. And so if you have an instance where the polarization is wrong for one reason or the other, it lines up with a monitor, for example, to make the monitor go black, which isn't the case in this video. My monitors behind me are in fact off, not polarized out of existence. Uh, the that You will have that polarization effect. Canon, going with 20 millimeters in the C70, was able to put a actual physical neutral density pack in that camera that uses actual light attenuating neutral density filters and not a polarized LCD panel matrix or LCD panel or LCD field or however you want to call it to attenuate the light. And I think that this was something that was actually in the plans from the beginning. I think Canon recognized when they were designing this that they needed to be able to have a mount like the EF mount in their cinema cameras, that if they wanted to share a mount across cinema and non-cinema cameras or still cameras, they needed a mount with enough room to allow them to do things like add a polarization assembly or a neutral density assembly in the cinema cameras that they could use. In the EF mount, because it's 46 millimeters deep, there's plenty of room for that. And in the RF mount, it seems with it being 20 millimeters deep, there's enough room there for that too. Now you could say, well, sure, but in doing that, they've compromised, how fast of a lens they can put on it, and da 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 da. According to a study done by Sony, the RF mount is capable of mounting a theoretical 0.62 lens, Nikon's f mount, where they had to make the shutter thinner and all of that stuff, only goes I think a tenth of a stop or something like that. It's like 0.61 or 0.60. uh, not all that much faster. And then the reality is regardless, Nikon, Canon, it doesn't matter. We're not going to see f 0.6 or 0.7 lenses. F.95 is probably the fastest we're going to see, and I'm dubious we're going to see, other than Nikon's 55 f1.5, I'm dubious that we're going to see anything substantial in the way of much faster than that. The reality is, fast lenses sound really good on paper. They're really hard to work with in practice, especially at those wide apertures, because of how shallow depth the field is and how absolutely critical it becomes to absolutely nail focus. So that's the depth and diameter. The other point Canon made a big deal talking about was the number of electrical pins, connections, however you want to call it. And Canon has loads of pins on the mount. There's 12 pins, which, as far as I could tell, surveying the rest of the field, is the most of any of the other camera mounts that are, mirrorless camera mounts out there. So Nikon and Micro Four Thirds uses 11 pins. Sony, Leica's SL, Sony's E mount, Leica SL mount, or Leica's SL mount, and the Panasonic full frame mount, I don't remember what it's called off the top of my head, all use 10 pins. What does that have to do with anything? I don't know. I don't know why Canon wanted to call so much attention to it. Certainly there are features that are I don't know if it's the pins, the number of pins, or the fact that it's a higher speed communication protocol that the RF mount enables. So you have much better distance information relayed from the lens to the camera, to the point that you can actually put focus distance in the viewfinder when you're manually focusing most, if not all, RF mount lenses. You obviously have the control dial that's available on all of the RF mount lenses and the control dial mount adapter. Presumably there's going to be, or there is, some communication driven interplay between in-lens and in-body image stabilizers that the RF mount, again, higher bandwidth, more pins, whatever, provides the facility to enable. Although in my experience with the R5, it seems that you can use in-lens and in-body image stabilization just fine with EF mount lenses, so that might not be as much of a deal as advertised as it seems. I'm not really sure. So where does that leave us with the RF mount? So as far as I can tell, when push comes to shove, the biggest advantage of the RF mount itself appears to be the same advantage that applies basically to all mirrorless mounts, which that it makes it easier to design and build faster lenses, or fast lenses with much higher image quality compared to what you would have on a DSLR. So we're already seeing multiple f1.2 lenses on the RF mount. There's the 50 f1.2, the 85 f1.2, and in both of those cases, and the 85 f1.2 DS, or whatever the defocus one is, we're also seeing fast zooms. The 28, or we've also seen a fast zoom, the 28 to 70 f2, and we've seen an increase in wide angle capabilities in the 15 to 35 f2.8 being the sort of replacement for the 16 to 35 f2.8. Not a huge increase in wide angle, but some. I think that's kind of going to be really where we see the limit with the practical improvement that comes from the RF mount. I don't think we're going to see the lenses get tremendously cheaper. In fact, the lenses on the market now are sort of more expensive than their EF counterparts, um, within certain bounds. So the 16 to 35 f2.8L and the 24 to 70 f2.8L are appreciably more expensive than their EF counterparts, but they also carry in-lens image stabilizers, and in-lens image stabilization has always carried a premium on Canon cameras and in Canon lenses, and the price differential from going from, say, an EF 1635 f2.8L3 to the RF 1535 f2.8L is in line with both the age of the EF lens and the inherent sort of drops in cost or decreases in cost that come with that, as well as the premium that Canon lenses that carry image stabilization tend to carry. Uh, so I'm not expecting to see $1,000 f1.4 or f2 lenses or something, like, or f1.2 lenses. I expect they're going to be just as expensive as they always have been, in no small part because they still need almost as much glass as they needed on an SLR. Big apertures, big lens elements. That's just the reality of it. So that's kind of the broad picture with the RF mount. That said, I have some problems with the RF mount. Uh, Mostly they're usability issues. They're not actual mechanical issues. Uh, but in some respects, I think Canon's engineers lost something that worked really well with the EF mount and the EFM mount, for that matter, when they went to the RF mount. So, to start with, the Canon made an aesthetic choice on the lens mount to, well, you can't really see it, me holding it there, but Canon made an aesthetic choice on the lens mount to make the area just behind the lens mount, or just adjacent to the lens mount, a gunmetal gray. So on EF lenses, the mount, there's the silver mount, metal lenses, but then the lens body itself is either black, or in the case of big telephoto lenses, white. On the RF mount lenses, there's a eighth inch-ish wide gunmetal gray area at the mount, and this is the case as far as I remember across all RF mount lenses. So why is this, like, it looks good, but what's the problem with this? Well, the problem with it is the way Canon then decided to implement the lens alignment marking. So all Canon's full frame lenses have a red lens alignment indicator on them somewhere. On the EF lenses, it's a, I don't know, eighth inch-ish diameter red raised dot. And on the RF mount lenses, it's a much smaller, slightly inset red line, for lack of a better word. And so this whole setup creates a problem for me, which is, first, the gunmetal gray and red, there's less contrast. So either black on red on black, or red on white of the EF lenses, there's an appreciable amount of contrast, and it's very easy to see the alignment indicator in most lighting conditions. Not all lighting conditions, but most lighting conditions. Compared to what I'm finding with the RF mount, is I have a much harder time orienting my lenses or lens mount adapters to the camera, because it's much more difficult for me to see the mount indicator, the alignment indicator, in many circumstances. So if I'm outside in bright daylight, yeah, no problem. If I've got all the lights on in the studio, yeah, no problem. I have plenty of light to see what I'm doing. But if I'm in a darkish room or a darkish environment or it's twilight, I run into a real problem of sort of finding that on the lens easily. This is coupled with the second problem, which it's no longer a large raised um, tactile bump on the lens. It's a small inset. You can sort of feel it if you feel around like enough, but it's also generally in most of the lens designs, RF lens designs, it's also generally that gunmetal ring is recessed below a larger part of the lens barrel, so there's not a tremendous amount of real estate there to get your finger in to feel the not so tactile new indicator, mount alignment indicator. And this is the problem that crops up. So in light where it's not easy to see, so in these lower light levels where contrast would be more helpful, with an EF lens, it's very easy to switch to a tactile, I can feel where that bump is that's right next to the lens mount, and I know that goes up, put it on, and lock it in place. With an RF lens, that's significantly more difficult, or at least I find it to be significantly more difficult. Now, I'm not saying that this is a world-ending problem, and it's something that Canon could very easily fix, changing the design aesthetic to go back to a more of a raised indicator with a little bit more space to be able to feel that tactily, and just in general, sort of, it would make the alignment easier, especially in low light. The other, like I said, a lot of these complaints are not huge world-breaking issues. I haven't not been able to mount a lens because the alignment indicator is harder to find. It's just harder to find. So it's not as visible, it's not as tactile as the EF lenses. It doesn't ruin anything, it doesn't end the world, it's just not as good. The second problem that I've run into is that the mounting lug arrangement in the lens mount for the RF lens is not symmetrical anymore, or is not regular, I should say, not symmetrical. So in the EF mount, the lugs on both the lens and the camera, so the mating, the locking, or however you want to put it, the surfaces that interact to lock the lens in place, are approximately 1/6 of the 1/6 of a circle each. So there's a 1/6 wide lug, a 1/6 wide gap, a 1/6 wide lug, a 1/6 wide gap, a 1/6 wide lug, and a one, all the way around. Now, you can't put the lenses on upside down. There's enough variation, or there's enough going on to prevent you from, say, putting a lens on upside down. However, when it comes to lens caps, so the rear lens cap and the front body and the body front caps, those can be put on in any of three orientations. And that makes it extremely easy to not care which way you put the lens caps on, because they're not really that important to put on in, one given orientation. With the RF mount, Canon now has three different size lugs. There's a large lug at the top right, or say 1 o'clock position. There's a medium lug at like the 7 or 8 o'clock position, and there's a small lug at the 3, 4 o'clock position. And the consequence of this is, of course, you can't put lenses on in any other orientation. You can't force them on in any other orientation. which I guess could help a little bit with alignment, with not having the tactile feel of being able to find the alignment indicator. You can only really mount the lens one way. Of course, that was really true of the EF mount too. You could really only mount the lens, or you could only mount the lens one way. I never found a way to force the lens on so that it was upside down or something like that. But now you have to actually line up the caps in the right orientation. And so I know maybe the OCD people out there think this is a great thing because their caps will always be oriented properly, but I tend to disagree. Having caps that I could put on in any, just put on if it went down or sat down, fully, I could rotate it and it locked, was a really, I won't say a great advantage. Is again, nothing that I'm talking about here with respect to the lens mounts is a huge advantage or a huge problem. But it's a little sort of niggle or whatever you want to call it. It's a little bump in the road. It's a little tweak that makes it a little less usable. Uh, I'm not going to change platforms over it. I'm not going to not buy RF lenses over it. It's just, it would have been nice if Canon's engineers, when they were designing the mount, had thought about the fact that, or the caps. I don't know if it's not something that could be done with the caps having like small locking tabs or locking lugs versus what the mounts have. But it's something that I think I would have been nice if the engineers building this or designing this had a little more sort of thought about. Now, I do have to say, and this might just be new camera-ish, but the mount feels a lot tighter than the EF mount on any of my EF cameras, even when they were new. It seems to hold on to lenses or mount adapters or whatever much more stably. Now, again, this could just be new camera and I haven't worn anything in, and so, as things go on, that will kind of change. But that is one sort of thing that I have noticed about the mount. So that's the RF mount kind of in a nutshell. Is it's going to enable Canon to do some stuff with lenses. We should see better quality, better optical quality, more than out of RF mount lenses compared to DSLR lenses. We should see lenses that you really had a hard time or couldn't really do on DSLRs, the 28 to 70, or just wouldn't be an economical on a DSLR. The 28 to 70 f2L being an example of that. I'm sure you could do that on an EF mount DSLR, but I don't want to know what the price tag would be because it's a $3,000 lens on the RF mount. On the EF mount, it'd probably be twice that, or something to that effect. But having changed the mounts, yeah, there's definitely some niggles in there with respect to not having symmetry to be able to put caps on, and the aesthetic choice that Canon went with for the alignment indicators. Like I said, it would be a lot nicer if it was a lot more tactile, that you could just feel it and lock it instead of having to sort of look at it more. So with that said, like I said, that's the short on the RF mount as I've come to experience and know it. If you found this useful or you just liked it, hit that like button, subscribe. I'm starting this long process to actually talk about the EOS R now, so if you want to be, if you'd like to see those videos, or the EOS R5, I should say, if you'd like to see those videos, subscribe, hit that notification bell so that you get notifications when I post those videos. Yeah, that's the, usual YouTube thing. So thanks for watching, and I will see you again next time.